One of my favorite parts about Christmas has always been going and picking out a tree. I've never been a fan of fake trees, though I see why some people like them. I just prefer the activity of going out with a loved one and picking out your Christmas tree together. But I will say, having a real tree takes a bit of maintenance, especially if you're like me and my fiance and decide to get a tree really early in the season. It was beautiful for a while, but after a couple of days of not being able to water it as often as we needed to, it began to dry out really quickly. I'll never forget the amount of panic that set in on December 14, 2018, when I woke up to the smell of smoke filling up our entire house. I woke up coughing at first. I thought I had gone blind because when I opened my eyes, I couldn't see anything. I quickly realized that it was due to the thickness of the smoke that was surrounding us, and I turned to wake up Claire. I shook her as hard as I could, and thankfully she woke up. Just like me, Claire was in a panic. The two of us rolled out of bed and dropped as low on the ground as we could. There was a small pocket of breathable air underneath the massive blanket of smoke, which allowed us both to breathe a tiny bit better. We both began crawling toward our bedroom door, and as I touched the door handle, it almost immediately burned my hand. I was able to turn it enough to open the door before my hand pulled itself away in pain. And as soon as the door opened, our room was illuminated by a bright orange light that almost cut through the smoke. The fire was coming from the living room, and right away I realized that I had forgotten to turn the lights on the tree off that night. I began guiding Claire through the hallway, on our hands and knees as the smoke began falling lower and lower. The closer we got to the living room, the higher the temperature went, but the only way out was through the front door, so there was nothing else that we could do. We both continued to cough violently as we made our way into the living room. Almost pausing for a second to look at the tree, through the smoke, we could see the flames dancing as they climbed away from the tree and up the wall behind it. We continued to make our way toward the front door and away from the tree as I felt something pulling onto the back of my leg. I turned and saw Claire. She was no longer crawling behind me, but instead was lying on the floor with her eyes just barely open and her face covered in ash. I knew that we didn't have much time. I got off my hands and knees and picked Claire up off the floor, and as soon as I had her, I began moving as fast as I could toward the front door. The locks burnt my fingertips, but I couldn't waste any time. As soon as the door was open, I pushed us both through it and laid Claire down on the lawn. By that time, our neighbor was standing outside and said that the fire department was on its way. I checked to make sure that Claire was breathing, and thankfully she was. The fire department got there in time to put the fire out, but more importantly, after getting checked out of the hospital, Claire turned out to be totally fine. There was no permanent damage from the lack of oxygen. It was Christmas Eve 2019, 3 years ago, but it feels like it was just yesterday. My girlfriend Marcy and I finally managed to get a house of our own just a few months beforehand, and we couldn't have been more excited for Christmas to get there. We originally planned on having family over, and we were going to host Christmas dinner, but we ended up feeling more comfortable going to Marcy's parents' house instead. Plans didn't change until Christmas morning though. As of Christmas Eve, we still planned on having everyone come over the next day, so Marcy and I made sure to get everything set up beforehand. I prepped all of the meals so that all I had to do was turn the oven on in the morning to start cooking. And then we wrapped up our presents in separate rooms to make sure that we didn't see what we got each other. By the time the night was over, the space under the tree was full of presents, and we decided to have some hot chocolate and watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer before going to bed. And in no time at all, we were both tired and ended up falling asleep on the couch as the movie played. It would have been a really great night had I not been woken up a little while later by a sound that was coming from the other side of the house. I tried to listen closely to what the sound was without moving too much and waking Marcy. And once I realized what I was hearing, my heart began to pound. I tried my best to stay calm as I woke Marcy up and told her that I needed her to grab her phone, quietly get into our bedroom, lock the door, and then call the police. She was confused at first, but once she heard the sound of the back door in the laundry room creaking open, she understood what was going on. The two of us quickly and quietly made our way out of the living room and into the hallway past the kitchen. From there, it was a straight shot into our bedroom where we locked the door. I told Marcy to call the police as I kept my ear pressed to the door to try to hear for any signs of movement. I couldn't hear much noise over the living room TV that was still on, but every now and then I could swear that I heard footsteps. After about 2 minutes, Marcy let me know that the police were on their way and that we should just wait for them to get to the house. But at that point, my ego started to kick in a bit, and I got really upset at the idea that we were being robbed. I asked Marcy to stay in the room while I went to see what was going on, and she objected at first, but there wasn't any stopping me. And to this day, it's one of the top 5 dumbest things I have ever done. I quietly made my way out of the bedroom and made sure to close the door behind me before making my way over to the kitchen door, expecting to find someone in there since the kitchen was on the other side of the laundry room that it sounded like they came in from. But when I saw the room was empty, my heart began to pound again. I don't know why I didn't turn around and just go back to the room and wait for the police, but I decided to continue looking for the intruder. I walked past the kitchen and into the living room, which is where I saw that someone was in fact in our house. He was standing near our tree and had one of the presents in his hand as if he was inspecting it. I could see that there was an open backpack on the floor next to him, with another small present of ours sitting beside it. I took a second and checked to see if I saw a weapon, but when I didn't see any, I assumed it was safe for me to confront the man. I called out for his attention and asked him what he was doing in my house. He jumped as he realized that I had been watching him, but he didn't say anything. I asked him again what he was doing, only this time he responded by slowly putting the present that he was holding down and pulling a gun out of his jacket pocket. He pointed it toward me, and I knew that I shouldn't have gone out there that night. Without thinking, I took off down the hallway and rushed into my bedroom. Marcy screamed because she didn't know it was me at first, but once she realized, she helped me move the small dresser in front of the door. We waited, expecting the thief to try to break down the door, but surprisingly enough, he didn't even try. The police got to our house a few minutes later and I ran out to let them inside, but it looked like whoever was in our house left as soon as I ran away from him. 3 of the presents that we put out for each other were missing, but other than that, we were okay. But since we were a little shaken up, we decided to have Christmas at Marcy's parents' in the morning instead of our house. Growing up in northern Minnesota, the winters could be really harsh sometimes, but it always led to a lot of fun times. From sledding to skating on the river that ran through our town, there was always something to do no matter how cold it was. Now, growing up with a family of hockey-playing older brothers, it was no surprise that I got into ice hockey, and more often than not, when we were skating on the river, my brothers and I were running drills and practicing. So when my skates started not to fit anymore, it seemed like the perfect present to ask for around Christmas, especially because of how expensive they could be. We didn't always get what we asked for during the holidays, but my parents always tried. So I wasn't surprised that year when I woke up Christmas morning and found a fresh pair of blades sitting under the tree just waiting for me to break them in. We finished opening up our presents and then all had some breakfast together, but as soon as we were done, it was like organized chaos. My oldest brother went back to sleep. My second oldest brother began playing some video games that he got, and my brother Jason and I decided to go out on the ice. Jason's a year older than I am, and since he got a new stick that he wanted to try out and I wanted to break in my skates, it was perfect. The walk to the river from our house was only about 15 minutes. We would walk along the sidewalk to the bridge that passed over the river, and from there we had a trail that led us down the small hill to the riverbank. Skating on the river was something that everyone in our town did every year, and we all knew what signs to look for to make sure that it was actually thick enough not to fall through. And since we had been on the river the day before, we figured that it was still just as cold and shouldn't have any problems. So as soon as we got down to the riverbank, we threw on our skates and began gliding across the smooth, icy surface. The new skates fit great, and they were super sharp, so it felt like I was sliding across an oiled-up surface. It was a lot of fun for a while, even after I began helping Jason practice some of his plays. But about 2 hours after we began skating, right as we were about to head home for lunch, I heard it. There's a really subtle sound that ice makes before it begins to crack, and if you're standing on the surface at the time, you can almost feel the ice shift under your feet. Jason and I both heard and recognized the sound and began quickly skating toward the edge of the river as gently as we could. I was relieved when I saw my brother fall into the snow on the side of the river, but within a second, that relief was ripped from my body. All I remember is the feeling of my body going into shock as the ice beneath me cracked and separated, causing me to drop into the ice-cold water beneath its surface. I tried to grab onto the edge of the ice, but was pulled under by the slight current before I could get a grip. The cold water pierced through my clothes, and I knew that I had to react quickly. The further that the current pulled me away from the hole, the less likely I was going to make it out alive. Thankfully, the current wasn't that strong, and I was able to swim against it. I pressed my back to the ice above me, hoping that once I found the hole, I would pop right out. But after a minute of swimming forward, I realized that I must have missed the hole somehow. I couldn't hold my breath much longer, and panic began to set in as I opened my eyes to look around for any source of light that could be a sign of the hole that I fell through. And eventually, I was able to find it. I swam back over to the hole and took in a deep breath of air as soon as I could. Jason had grabbed a fallen tree branch and placed it right next to the hole for me to grab onto. Once I had grabbed it, he pulled on the other end and brought me over to the riverbank. The two of us rushed home as fast as we could, and as soon as my parents saw me, they sprang into action, doing everything they could to warm me up. I ended up catching a bit of a cold from it, but other than that, I'm just happy to be alive.